Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Joy Connolly, and as Provost and Senior Vice President, I have the privilege of welcoming you to the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and I have the privilege of welcoming you to tonight's event. I'm especially pleased to welcome, I say hello into the ether to those who are watching from afar via live stream, an audience that's growing week to week, month to month, I'm happy to say. Tonight, we're going to be treated to a discussion on a topic that's absolutely central to what we do here at the Graduate Center, and that's teaching. Our own professor, Cathy Davidson, has brought a much-needed critical eye to higher education in her acclaimed new book, The New Education: How to Revolutionize the University to Prepare Students for a World in Flux. Cathy has been hailed as having written a manifesto on higher education by book reviewers and education reporters, and rightly so, for she advocates powerfully for learning that's interconnected at every level, interconnected between students and faculty, between students and students, between students and the world. We need her arguments. American universities are welcoming more students and more students of different backgrounds than ever before, and that's a great thing, that's an amazing thing. But our pedagogy, and I say this as a member of the faculty, I'm a member of the classics department, our pedagogy, our lectures, our seminars, our research papers, and our lab reports, all of this looks awfully a lot like the classrooms and the assignments of the late 19th century. It is really beyond past time for change. And Cathy advocates for learning that's unbound by conventional disciplines, that's immersive, that's focused on problem solving. She wants us educators to harness the benefits of technology and the possibilities it offers to be social. If you didn't think technology could be social, you'll learn otherwise. To be creative and to be disruptive in the most constructive way. Here at the Graduate Center, we're embarked on a number of innovations in teaching at the graduate level that draw explicitly on Cathy's work for inspiration, and that draw on the great gift of her presence here on the faculty. So I'm especially delighted that she and Anya Kamenetz will delve further into her research, the inspiring story that is CUNY, and Cathy's recommendations for disrupting colleges and universities to meet the demands of today's world. I want to say that the fact that you find Cathy Davidson here at the Graduate Center, at the center of this conversation, is no coincidence. As our name implies, the Graduate Center is a national leader in graduate education. We're one of the largest PhD granting institutions in the country, and we're especially proud to rank among the nation's top 10 institutions in awarding doctorates to students from underrepresented minority groups. Every year, and I say this, I repeat this statistic everywhere I go, so I apologize to those who have heard it already. It's one of my favorite numbers in the whole world. Every year, our doctoral students teach more than 180,000 CUNY undergraduates at the City University of New York. Okay, we are bringing the very best research and learning from the seminar rooms here at the Graduate Center into every neighborhood, every borough of the city. Our faculty include winners of the Guggenheim and the Pulitzer and the Nobel Prizes. We're an incubator of vigorous debate reflected in our academic programs, in our research centers, and in our free public events like these. I believe myself strongly that no other graduate school in the country takes more seriously its public responsibilities or its mission to advance knowledge in the public good. So let me frame the discussion that's about to begin with just a few words of introduction about our two participants. In the Washington Post review of The New Education, Michael Roth wrote that, and I quote, "At her best, Davidson writes in the tradition of Du Bois and Dewey, a pragmatist tradition that sees learning through the potential of the full, complex human beings students can become." Du Bois and Dewey, that's amazing. and absolutely incredibly well-deserved. Cathy brought this passion to her work at the Graduate Center when she joined us as a distinguished professor of English and as the founding director of the Futures Initiative in 2014. She's also currently co-director of the CUNY Humanities Alliance, a groundbreaking program in partnership with LaGuardia Community College that's funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, which trains doctoral students to teach in community colleges. And I have the honor of working closely with Cathy on that initiative. Cathy's also co-director of Haystack, the Humanities, Arts, Science, and Technology Alliance and Collaboratory, the world's first and oldest academic social network, which she co-founded in 2002. She's published more than 20 books, and in 2012, she was named the first educator to serve on the board of directors at Mozilla. President Obama appointed Cathy to the National Council on the Humanities, on which she served from 2011 to 2017. It's a starry CV, and I could go on and on. Anya Kamenetz, our other conversationalist, is the lead digital educator correspondent for NPR. She was named a 2010 Game Changer in Education by the Huffington Post, and she won 2009, 2010, and 2015 national awards from the Education Writers Association. In her books, Anya has delved into important education issues, including DIYU, edupunks, edupreneurs, and the coming transformation of higher education, a book that investigated innovations to address the crises in cost and access and quality in higher education. She's also the author of The Test, a title that may instill nervousness in our hearts, which is about the past, present, and future of testing in American schools. And in January, and you may hear a little bit about this, her newest book, The Art of Screen Time, How Your Family Can Balance Digital Media and Real Life, will appear. In her op-ed in the Chronicle of Higher Education not long ago, Cathy wrote, and I quote, "We need to revolutionize our colleges, vigorously support them as a public good." Well, those of us at the Graduate Center could not agree more. With that, please join me in warmest welcome for our speakers.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going really well.
I'm so pleased to be invited to talk with you tonight.
I know, it's great. And I just have to say, Anya ran the marathon yesterday. So I think that is really an amazing thing.
Happy to be sitting down. This is good. These are comfy chairs. I've learned so much from you over the years, and it really is an honor. And everybody who's here tonight, if you haven't learned, who here has taken a class with Cathy before? Okay, so everybody else is really lucky because we're going to get a sample of how she teaches and the enthusiasm she brings to all her ideas tonight.
Yes, actually those pencils and paper and index cards aren't just swag. We are going to actually do a little class thing together.
Heads up. Pop quiz. Just kidding.
So keep them out.
Why don't you start by telling us, and I was privy to some of the conversations on social media that you had about what to call this book while it was in gestation. Tell me about why you settled on The New Education.
So I stole the title. In 1869, actually was no longer a Harvard professor. He was teaching at MIT, a chemist named Charles Eliot, wrote a scathing indictment of American higher education in the Atlantic Monthly. It went over 2 issues of Atlantic Monthly. It was all the rage, all the news at the time, and it was called The New Education. And in that, Eliot partly gets out a personal gripe. He'd been a professor at Harvard before. During the Panic of 1857, when his father lost all of the famous and vast Eliot family fortune in the Panic, which was the world's first global financial collapse. And the rest of the world blamed that collapse on American naivete, and specifically on a terrible American education system that was preparing an elite to be ministers. Eliot had a personal stake in that because 1, he lost the family fortune, his inheritance, and 2, you could not teach at Harvard in 1857 on your own income. The salaries were so low, it was assumed you had a personal income. So without a personal income, without an inheritance, he couldn't be a professor. Right? So he went to Europe and he studied the modern Humboldtian University in Berlin and the French system, and came back and he wrote The New Education, saying we have to remake everything about the Puritan college for this new industrial age that needs these things called professionals. and middle-class managers of the money basically made by the elite, all the professions that constitute the professional managerial class. We need to remake college, not for Latin and Greek to train ministers, elite ministers, but a vast new middle class of professions. And he advocated that, and weirdly, Harvard had lost 3 presidents in a row, and they hired this 34-year-old to be its president, right? He lasted 40 years, and in the course of that 40 years, pretty much created the university we have today. I stole the title because I believe that we need a new education now, that we're going through cataclysmic changes every bit as much as the ones that were faced by Eliot and his peers after the collapse of 1857, with industrialization, with all of the different changes that are happening in American society. And we need to rethink everything for our era in the same way that Eliot and his peers did, basically between the era of about the 1860s and 1925.
Okay, a modest proposal. And what does your new education look like? What are the key elements?
My new education probably exists right now at every college and university in the country, but it exists around the periphery. It's the exciting kinds of ways, actually, that most professors think and often write about. It's in centers and institutes that connect knowledge. It doesn't keep the focus on credentialing of silos that are humanities versus the arts versus the social sciences versus the sciences, but says, actually, we live in a world where those things aren't distinct anymore. If we're going to really prepare students to do the kind of business they have to do in this world, and I would say that do the kind of battle that needs to be done belatedly in this world, they have to understand the world we're living in a far deeper and more complex way, historically, philosophically, creatively, quantitatively, qualitatively, but all together. And there are many programs like this around the country. They're here, they're everywhere, but they're not where you get tenure, they're not where you get ranked, they're not where you get your credentials as an institution or as an individual making your way up through those institutions.
So you're basically saying the real action's happening in the skunk works, off to the margins where nobody's really paying attention.
Totally. And so we need a kind of tidal wave where we take the periphery and make it the core and stop keeping the core is often a pretty contentious place. And I think part of the reason is because people within departments are often fighting not against their peers, but against 100 years of peers that are defending turf and replicating themselves year after year after year. Wow, all kinds of exciting productive intellectual life is happening around the edges.
So there's many people out there who would agree with you to a certain extent about the diagnosis of higher education, but their prescription is entirely different. And they talk about things like workforce training and the need for STEM skills and micro-credentials and things that have take place outside the university and for profit. And you say that skills training is a disaster. Yeah. And you kind of go out against STEM and present this very dystopic vision of STEM-only education. Tell me why that is.
Sure, thank you. I actually think in the last decade we've seen, we all know things have to change. I don't know anybody that looks at their university and says, this is perfect. There's not a thing I would change, right? Maybe there's somebody in the audience that feels that way. I haven't met that person yet. But unfortunately, we've had 2 really disastrous movements in the last decade or so that are saying we must change everything and that are going in exactly the wrong direction. One is the ed tech movement. There's a chapter in the book that's against technophobia, and then there's a chapter in the book that's against technophilia. And the technophiliacs were ones do you remember MOOCs? Massive online open courseware. Thomas Friedman, the New York Times, said not only would it reduce tuition, but MOOCs would end world poverty. Well, it hasn't quite happened, right? But there was this kind of blind idea that if you just technologized everything, if you mass-produced it, it would solve all the problems of education. Well, all that really would do is mass-produce the problems we have, make them faster, more 19th century, more instrumental, more top-down, more alienated, less project-based. So that's one movement that I think we have to really rethink. And I'm not against technology at all, but we need to be much smarter about what technology does and what learning is. The other one is this skills training. For a while, it was often almost a cover for radical cutbacks to higher education in many state universities, an ideological cover. You couldn't say we're going to cut out all the humanities departments and all the African American studies department, and all the women's studies departments. So you said, no, 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 we're cutting out the frills, and we're going to emphasize the skills because we care about our students getting jobs in the future. Well, the jobs you get with basic skills training in STEM are the ones that are most, we've got much research on this, most readily outsourced or automated by artificial intelligence. Google has done 2 massive studies of its own workforce. Every single person that's been hired, been fired, been promoted, to see what makes a great Google employee. And of course, Google famously only started out saying we're only going to hire computer scientists and engineers. Forget all that social science stuff. Forget MBAs. We're in the modern world. We're only going to hire engineers. Turns out technical expertise didn't even make the top 8 of Google's own data of who it promoted. Somebody said it was the things that got you promoted at Google were read like a parody of The Office. Playing well with others, learning how to be a good listener, having multicultural understanding, being a good writer, being a good speaker, right? None of which were engineering. And I think in the new education, we actually have to think about those basic skills as skills training, but skills training in things like philosophical thinking, creative thinking, innovative thinking, good communication, how we understand people from different cultures, how we teach people from who come from different cultures. Those are skills, and those are the skills we know, including from Google, are the ones that help you survive and thrive in a world that's changing faster than any of us can keep track of.
So you lay out this really innovative vision, and you talk about the need to go broad and the need to go in depth. And then, you come to a university like this, which is a very large university that's innovating in so many different ways. You and I share this interest in, the economic fortunes of young people and the fact that we need to pay for all this. And I don't know. What do you think? I mean, how do we actually, are we going to convince people to spend more money to make higher education more affordable and better at the same time?
We don't seem to be in a current political moment where we care very much about the good of society and paying much for the good of society. It does alarm me when I hear people who have kids that are college age railing against college for raising its costs and not taking responsibility for having voted in people, especially in public education, over the last 2 decades that have systematically cut the per capita funding of education. University of Colorado now gets 3% of its funding from the state of Colorado. 3%. Right? So who's paying the cost of that education? Some grant, some external funding, some private corporate philanthropy. Most of it's being paid by the students, right? It's tuition. And if it's not Colorado students, it's out-of-state tuition or out-of-country tuition from people from elsewhere. Somebody once said that we're in a situation now where to make our budgets, every state has to be courting the students from every other state. That's nuts, right? That's just crazy. It's crazy. So, I don't think we're in a national time where there's a organized political effort to support things as public goods, including higher education. But I think people mostly know it, especially if you have kids or you're even thinking about the complexity of the problems this generation has inherited that they have to solve somehow. And if they have to pay for their education on top of that, they're just not going to be able to have the training to solve the problems we've bequeathed to them.
So in Michael Roth's review in the Washington Post, I think he made, he liked the book a lot. He made this point that, your economic argument is a little bit panic-inducing, where a lot of the rest of the book is quite optimistic and inspiring. And I wonder how you reconcile those two views.
Yeah. Well, first of all, one of the reasons I came to CUNY in 2014, and I was very passionately concerned with the fate of public education. I previously taught at a very elite private university, Duke University, and if you tell people you're passionate and think that the center will not hold unless we support public education, and you teach at a place like Duke, you get this look like, yeah, you doofus. What do you know about the life of people teaching and going to school at public universities. So I have such admiration. I have no New York anything in my background. This is all very new, but I have such admiration for CUNY that I came here. And this is an affordable education. I personally think every bridge and tunnel should have a big flashing sign that says this is the most expensive city in the country, but your kid can get an education here. The flip side of that is, wow, strained resources. All those people who said I was a jerk when I was talking about public education and hadn't been here, they were right. The strained resources, the adjunct teaching, which is a national public problem, not just at CUNY, the lack of remuneration, the lack of services for our students. There just isn't funding for advisors. There's so many things. You have to be valiant and tough and incredibly smart to succeed against those things and against food shortage, food insecurity, housing insecurity, working full time, all of the things, commuting, all of the things that make it hard to be a student. And yet this is an amazing institution. I do think nationally we have to have a national movement to value our public universities everywhere. They really are prizes. One of the big problems with our most elite universities is the converse. It doesn't matter how much the top 10 universities charge. They get more and more selective every year. It's like you charge 10,000 more and then you're only selecting 3% instead of 4% of the students. What's the downside? I mean, I've talked to many administrators at Harvard about this. The most common occupation of a student who graduates from Harvard as an undergraduate now is tending the money of other students who went to Harvard. That's not literally the case, but metaphorically, they're money tenders for other Harvard graduates. Princeton is also in that situation. No one wants that for it. That's not the end of education. So, so you have a problem at both extremes, at both ends of the spectrum.
You've been out with the book for a little while now, and getting, good responses, I'm sure. What is the one question that you wish people would ask?
It's so interesting. I get asked a lot of fabulous questions, and I've learned so much since being on the road with this book. The one question no one says is, what can I do? Right? Yeah, people want to say, God, the system can't change. The administration can't change. My department chair can't change. My program can't change. Nobody says, what can I do? And one reason I've gone to what are called inventory methods in classrooms, where I don't call on students. I have a situation, we're going to do that with these cards, where it's also called radical pedagogy, engaged pedagogy, student-centered learning. I try every class to do something where every student in the class hears their own voice. We have sociologists of education who say that 20% of students graduate from college saying, except in situations where they were called on, they never once spoke in a classroom. That to me is tragic. That's more tragic than having conventional silos. That if you don't learn what your voice is and how to have a voice in school, then from college, then you get the political situation we've had. So part of radical pedagogy is saying everybody has something to contribute. So saying, what can I do, isn't just taking responsibility, it's becoming an activist. And I think everybody has to be an activist on behalf of higher education right now. The book is dedicated to millennials. I think they've been given a terrible raw deal. The stupid things we say about millennials, none of them are true. They don't read anymore. Actually, the publishing business would be in big trouble if it weren't for young adult fiction and books that people read. Millennials use libraries more than any other age group. They read more than adults read. It's dedicated to millennials and all the generations that come after. And I think we who are not millennials anymore have a responsibility to fix the problems, at least of education, to give students a chance to fix the horrific social inequality, environmental disasters, political disasters that we've inflicted on them. So that's the question I most want. It's people saying, what can I do?
So I have a question for you, which has to do with something you get out in the book as a matter of one of these changing interdisciplinary issues or problems, ways of looking at the knowledge corpus that we have, and something that I experience as a journalist, which is how do we get people to understand what they're reading online, and how do we get people to read online and make them literate online? And I wonder if we could use this as a little bit of a case study of what you mean by making the academic periphery into the core.
Sure. So I'm going to switch this and ask Anya a question a little bit because she's a great expert on this, and it seems awful not to use all the resources in the room. So I'm going to ask Anya about the Art of Screen Time, her new book, and the work she's done on digital literacy. But even before that, here's one of the two programs I love. At Arizona State University, there's a program in art, engineering, and new media. That program by the directors Shaw begins by asking students when they first start college a really complicated question that no one individual could ask, and it reshapes general education by asking a complicated question. One of my favorites that Dean Shaw asked a few years ago is, it's in Arizona State in Phoenix, what will life be like in Phoenix when there's no more water? That's a technical question. That's a social question. It's not so far in the future. If you live in Phoenix, you're worrying about water every day. Do you buy water? Who gets the water? Do you have to have money to buy the water? Does that mean some people drown? What have people done in the past? People use all the different possibilities of the university, the resources of the university, to try to come up with thoughtful answers. What they learn is they can't come up with them by themselves, but they can come up with them together and by using resources online and learning even what the advantages of technology are and what the disadvantages. I learned recently that one Bitcoin transaction uses the same amount of energy as a house uses in a week, right? So we've got this environmental, because every Bitcoin transaction embodies every other Bitcoin transaction. So what that means is we've got this fancy, fabulous new way of using currency that's a complete environmental hog. I mean, who knows those things, right? We have to learn those things. Those are the kinds of things we have to teach students about the world we're living in. Another one I love is Sarah Hendren's program at Olin College, which is the nation's first and maybe the only liberal arts engineering college, where she works with disability, but hates the word disability. So, for example, she works with the affordances of ramps. And to build ramps, she puts together wheelchair users, skateboard users with her students, and together they come up with these lightweight, amazing ramps that help everybody. Things that the skateboarders would have never come up with and that the wheelchair users wouldn't have come up with. She's an artist. She also wants these to be beautiful, usable, tactile, enjoyable things that people actually use, right? And she teaches students how to use and how to find information, but how to also put that information together also by making sure you always ask, what do you want? A question that the internet, people who are designing the internet should be asking a lot more often. Anya is one of our great practitioners, historians, theorists of how to use the internet. And before we came on stage, we were both talking about what digital literacy should look like now. I think digital literacy for a while was like how to use an iPad. No, we have to know how our data is being used, how our voting machines are being hacked, who's hacking them, how Facebook is selling our data through the president's son-in-law to the Russians. I mean, there's lots of things we have to know that are part of digital literacy. And we better know them or we're never going to get out of the situation we're in now, right? And I think we need to be having a foundational digital literacy courses, and digital literacy is a requirement in every course that's taught, whether it's Latin or biomedicine. How technology is using our data should be built into that course. Anya was saying, yeah, and we need to go back to preschool to be doing this. It shouldn't just be college students doing this, but this kind of digital literacy. Weaponizing ourselves against the way that the technology has been weaponized against us is something we need from the beginning. So I'd love you to just say a few words about that.
Well, I mean, I think where we meet in common is this like lovely humanity and sense of ethics and of each person's sort of sacredness unto themselves that you bring to your work in your interest in pedagogy and in engaging people as human beings. And I really feel like at the heart, digital literacy is about knowing yourself. It's about knowing how much emotion, where are my emotions leading me? When is my emotion overtaking my mind? how much attention do I have in a day and how do I want to spend it? Can I make a conscious effort of decision about that? You know, knowing what questions to ask and knowing the gaps in our own knowledge, right? The only thing I know is that I know nothing. And that is completely true here. Knowing when there's gaps in your knowledge, because I think our minds cover over everything with certainty. And the older I get, the more I realize how much I don't know. But that, I mean, what do you think about the ethics and the emotional intelligence as being the beginning of a digital literacy?
So one thing we know about ourselves as humans is we're really bad at knowing ourselves. I had the fortune to teach with a economic behaviorist at my previous job, Dan Ariely, who does these marvelous tricks on us, where we say the thing we think we do, and then he shows us what we actually did. And we started every class with a trick. He would ask a student something, and we'd walk into class, and he'd say, 85% of them are going to say this, but they're actually doing this. We're really terrible at that. And unfortunately, I think some very smart people who understand economic behaviorism and understand what tricks us have designed our tools for us. So, for example, there's a famous experiment where these two sociologists put up a fake software site where you could get free software. And to get this free software, it was cool. So that's why we do it. It's so cool, right? It was fabulous, wonderful software. And to get it, we had to sign a terms of service agreement. And after you sign the terms of service agreement, a little pop-up appears on your screen that says, did you read the first sentence? The first sentence just gave away rights to your firstborn child. Over 90% of people give away rights to their firstborn child to get some free software, right? So I think we have to think not just about our own ethics, but how we rebuild ethical principles into the things that seem automatic that are in our lives, so that the default has to be more ethical than it is, right? We now have dolls that little kids play with that say, hi, my name is Barbie, what's yours? My middle name is Ann, what's yours? My address is this, what's yours? Right? I mean, that's the scariest example, but we're all kind of that little kid giving our information constantly to people who do not have our best interests at heart, right? The oldest adage of the internet is, if it's free, you're not the consumer, you're the product being sold. And boy, have we been sold, right? So I think it's not just ethics, but it's defensive ethics. If I'm a researcher doing research on human subjects, right? Our program, the Futures Initiative, is doing two different seminars this semester on the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, and what it means to have ethical requirements before you do research. But automated algorithms can't be held responsible, right? Legally. That's got to change. That's ridiculous, right? The things that are ruling our lives, our democracy, our everyday life can't change. So I think it's not just about personal individualized ethics, but a social ethic and a movement towards a social ethic and a recreation of the terms of service of our interactions in the internet age. And by the way, I'm fortunate to be on the board with Mozilla, which is with literally some of the people that created the internet. And they're more alarmed than any of us in this room could be about what's happened to the internet they thought was going to be this glorious community of sharing, right? So they're asking the question, what if we had an IRB for any kind of data use? Imagine if Facebook had to go through a really rigorous ethical requirement for data use. And what if we as students weren't responsible for making those decisions, but were responsible for knowing what was the ethical use and manipulation of data? So
I asked you a question about education. You immediately turned it to social change.
Well, I think that's right, because I think if education is worth anything, it's got to be relevant to the society we're living in. And that's whether you're studying Thucydides, who's got a lot to say about the society we live in, actually, or Python, programming language. Right? But I also think it's about many of the things that we blame on education are also social problems. One of the ones I've become obsessed with is often people say college graduates don't make as much money as they used to 20 years ago, as if that's the fault of college education, right? A recent study just came out in October said that 94% of new jobs are in casualized labor. Uber drivers, the equivalent of Uber drivers, in 94% of new jobs created in the last decade, right? That's not higher education's problem if we're training people for those jobs. That's a social problem. Here's another one. 25 years ago, about 48% of college students were women. Now about 62% of college education are women. The vast majority of women still go into the four so-called feminized profession: teaching, social work, librarianship, healthcare. Right? Vastly underpaid professions. The great laws of capitalism, supply and demand, don't work in those professions. We now have a teacher shortage in 50 out of 50 states. Has it raised the teacher salaries? No. Right? That's not an education problem. That's a social problem. But I think if we're activists and we say, what can we do? We have to be activists about our society, of which public education is a training ground, not only for how to do better in society, but a training ground for the worst parts of society, and we have to change those too. Small. I'm not asking people to do much.
But you remain in the field of education because you believe it can make a difference.
Totally. And I feel like we just came back from a national conference, our Haystack Conference, Humanities, Arts, Science, Technology, Alliance, and Collaboratory. And some of the undergraduates we brought are students in a program. So I teach a lot of graduate students who teach undergraduates, and our program's about teaching graduate students who teach those 180,000 undergraduates throughout CUNY. And we had some of the graduate students who teach those classes nominate their best students to be peer leaders, and then we have a peer mentorship and peer leadership program so the students who are the successes can help other students succeed. These two students who were there, people kept coming up to them, undergraduates, and saying, what graduate school do you go to? And they would say City Tech, CCNY. People were astonished at their poise and their leadership ability, and that they were delivering famous professors and delivering papers to famous professors, and people thought maybe they're young junior professors. I think every day in education I see miracles. And that's not necessarily the case when I'm on Twitter every day, which I spend way too much time on. It's not necessarily the case if I'm looking at the New York Times every day. I do see education. So the one thing that's similar between Harvard at $60,000 or Stanford at $60,000 a year and CUNY at $6,000 a year is that you are only in college as a volunteer, right? K through 12. You have to stay in school till you're 16, there's compulsory. No one makes you go to college, right? Do you know how bad we are as humans at doing things that are voluntary and that are sort of good for each other, sort of good for us in the long run? The famous one is gym membership. Your local gym membership will fail in its business plan if you sign up for a year and pay a year in advance in January and you're still using the gym by February 15th, right? Its business plan is predicated on you're paying your money in advance and not going to the gym.
You know, there's some colleges that work like that too.
Pardon me?
There's some colleges that work like that too.
There's horrible exploitative colleges, especially for-profits that work like that. But that anyone stays in college for 4 years against all the odds we throw at them, to me is a miracle. So I actually find teaching at CUNY one of the most optimistic, inspiring, energizing, invigorating, profound experiences I've ever had in my entire life. So that's just why I stick it out and why I'm in education and why it's worth working to change it, right? Because these are students making tremendous sacrifices of time, attention, money, and pleasure because they think college is going to change their lives. Stephanie Marlin is in the audience. She's one of the people I profile in the book. She was a LaGuardia College undergraduate and then went to Baruch and now is an advisor and a counselor. What's your title? At LaGuardia Community College. She made a beautiful video called Why Are You in College? And it begins with Frank Sinatra singing New York, New York. And then she interviews maybe 40 people, many of them from different countries. There's a little flag of the country they're in. She asks, why are you in college? No one says, because I want to make money and screw those people I can make money off of. Every single person says, I want a better life for me and my community. I want to make my parents proud. I want to make my country proud. I want to be one of the first women in STEM from my area. I want to make the world a better place. I mean, I can't, there's nothing, it's a gift every day to be able to be an educator and meet people like Stephanie and the people I encounter in my classes. That's why I do it. I'm selfish.
Can you tell them about some of the techniques you use, the pedagogy? Because you
Yeah.
say pedagogy is irrelevant in a lot of universities because they follow this apprenticeship
Yeah.
model, and you've totally upended that. So tell us about how.
So I'm going to do that a little bit backwards. I want to read a list of some of the things that were invented for higher education between 1865 and 1925. Okay, it's kind of a long list. I think I can do it in one breath. Well, mandatory public schooling, secondary schooling, K-12 curriculum requirements designed as de facto pre-college by academics on the Committee of 10, led by Eliot. Land-grant universities, research universities, historically black colleges and universities, community colleges, majors, minors, electives, divisions separating the humanities, social science, and natural science, degree requirements, credit hours, grades, educational metrics and statistics, standard deviation, spreadsheets, donor name chairs, corporate sponsorship of research, invested endowments, IQ tests, multiple choice tests, college entrance exams, multiple choice college entrance exams, the College Entrance Examination Board, the SATs, 1925, graduate school, collegiate law school, nursing school, graduate school of education, collegiate business school, tenure, sabbaticals, faculty pensions, school rankings, merit scholarships, financial aid, giftedness, learning disabilities, adolescence. The F for failure didn't exist before then. All right? That's kind of everything we have now. What's not on the list? Pedagogy. Because Eliot believed that at the research university, didn't have to learn about teaching. That was for K-12 teachers. At a university, you did your research, and the students who shared your values sort of copied and by osmosis got the values that you were perpetuating and understood how to be. You're an expert. Your job was to be an expert, and the student's job was to learn to be an expert, was to learn what you learned, to learn your expertise. I believe this is one reason why, despite 20 years of brilliant work on race and gender theory, the Academy today has fewer women and fewer people of color, men and women of color, in 2017 than it had in 1997. And then our demographics are almost indistinguishable from Fortune 100 companies. So if we're getting in trouble for being so liberal, right, and so progressive, but we're replicating ourselves, something is going wrong. And I'm convinced, now I'm going to read something else, that part of the reason is we've left pedagogy to emulating experts. And we're constantly replicating experts rather than finding ways where every student can learn what it means. What's the process for becoming an expert? What's the how? This is called metacognition or reflection. But I want to read something, an amazing quote by the science fiction writer Samuel Delaney, who's probably the most learned of all of our writers, but he's an autodidact. He never went to college. He went to Bronx School of Science, and then he's black and he's gay, and he went to the Village right after high school and published his first novel at 20, and never went to college and had this incredibly naive idea about college. He thought college was going to be an intellectual wonderland. He walked into a college classroom and asked a question, and there were the eager beavers who raised their hand, the ones that make us so happy when we're teachers, right? Because they're the ones like us who raise their hand. That's not what he noticed. He noticed all the students in class who didn't raise their hands. This is Delaney. Don't you realize that every time you don't answer a question, you're learning something? You're learning how to make do with what you got. And you're learning how not to ask for a raise. You're learning how to take it. That's not good. That's not good. So from now on, whenever I ask a question in my classroom, everybody's got to put up their hand. I don't care whether you know the answer or not. You have to put up your hand. I'm going to call on you, and if you don't know the answer, I want you to say nice and clear, I don't know the answer to that, Professor Delaney, but I would like to hear what that person has to say, and we'll pass it on. And so this is what we started doing. And I said, whenever I ask a question, everyone put up their hand. I don't care whether you know or not. You need to teach people they are important enough to have a say. So now I do that. I ask everyone to raise their hand. I personally believe that these inventory methods, the radical pedagogy methods, where everybody has a say and everybody gets to hear their voice. And I've done this with 6,000 people, IB teachers in the Philadelphia 76ers auditorium. I've got friends who teach 600 students, and they ask an inventory question, always on some kind of piece of paper and pencil that the students pass in every class. It works for that. It works in faculty meetings too, where instead of the people who always raise their hand and hog everything, you hear from everybody before anybody, and you have people write something down and read it. So you hear from everybody before you have a chance for groupthink. I've also done this with the CEOs of the top 100 companies that work as part of the Cisco conglomerate. And the president of Cisco, who used to be head of the board of trustees at the university I used to teach at, said there's no more sheepish people in the world than a bunch of CEOs when the CEO that they report to is in the room. So this inventory method is for originality, for innovation, to get everybody's idea, but also for equality. So it's not just the people who know how to mirror you, but everybody who participates and gives an idea. Inevitably, when I do this in a classroom, I come up with things I never would have come up with if I just asked my students who knows the answer and got the answer from the student who knows.
Let's get to it.
Let's do it. So you all have pencils and you all have paper. I have index cards. The only way this works is by being very fast and low stakes, right? It doesn't matter, right? There's going to be a Q&A. So let's just take 90 seconds, have everybody write on your card the one burning question you have after this conversation that we've had together. What's your burning question right now? And write it out, because this is only part one of this exercise. Somebody else is going to have to read it. So write out a question, 90 seconds. What's your question? If you can ask us one question, what's your burning question? I often ask this at the end of a class. Right, the class is over, and before people leave, I use the last 3 minutes to have students do, it's called an exit ticket in education parlance. What's the question we didn't answer today? Or a variation I learned from one of my students, what it came up in today's class that's going to keep you awake at night? And if nothing did, what should we have talked about that will keep you awake at night? You learned so much from your students, and we're going to now learn from you. 90 seconds, what's your burning question for us? Write it out. The pencils, by the way, should be turning colors in your hand. Stephanie designed those, by the way. By the way, I also always tell my students that we're using state-of-the-art technology, machine-made paper and machine-made pencils, because I like to get them out of the idea of thinking that technology is only something electronic. Okay, 90 seconds. Do you need another second? 2 more seconds? Are you ready? You ready? So now, and I like to do this in a very ritualized way because that 20% of students who never hear themselves speak in a classroom haunts me. Turn to someone next to you, and again, it'll be 90 seconds. One person reads what's on their card. Don't elaborate. Just read what's on your card, and the other person listen. Right? We're not so good at teaching people how to listen. Then switch and let the first person read what's on their card and listen. And then figure out together, this is called learning how to collaborate, which question you might want to go to the mic to read for us. You might have to combine questions, edit questions. You might have to give a little, right? But come up with one question together. But first, do that ritual. One person reads, or if you don't have a card, speaks, the other person listens, and then reverse it. Make sure you've heard each other, and then work on one question together. 90 seconds for the whole thing, so it's very fast. Does everyone have their question? Does everyone have a question? What I love whenever I do an inventory method like this is it's often hard to get people's attention back. And that's great, because let's just say, how many of you are teachers or have been teachers or about to be teachers? Okay. You've probably taught a class or two where your students aren't so engaged in the ideas that you can't get their attention, right? Right. I've never done an inventory method in a class where students are bored. We have so much research on things like motivation to read again. Something as simple as asking an exit ticket at the end of the class makes people want to read more, and they know they're going to participate. A student last semester taught me a very beautiful, it seems so simple, exercise where I always have my students invent exercises for our class. She had every person go around the room, write on their card one sentence or idea, one sentence that they loved or hated or didn't understand from the readings for that day. And then we went around the room and everybody just read their sentence. What was amazing is no one had the same sentence. We thought we all read the same assignment. We didn't, right? That's how attention works. We know that, right? We've got lots of studies of that too. You don't read everything. You think you do, but you find what's attentive and then you pay attention there. And it's a great way to find out all the different ways people had paid attention in the room. So I think we're going to now go into the Q&A, and you've got your questions ready to read to us. So I think there's a mic. Are there mics around, or are these? Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, there's 2 mics here. Anyone want to read your question to the mic?
How can the adjunctization of college faculty be transformed into workable full-time jobs?
There's only one sentence in my book that's like repeated 4 times, and it's that higher education has a horrific crisis, and the crisis is the crisis of adjunctification. There have been many ways of doing this at different places. Last year at CUNY, there was a proposal, I don't know if it was ratified, that people be given 3-year contracts. At least, did that go through? Has that been accepted? It's being, great. Great. I think it's institution specific, and every institution has to deal with this. I wish there were one way. I've gotten enough involved in the discussion about adjuncts, and I gave my first speech against the adjunctification of the profession when I was president of the American Studies Association in 1993. It seemed like a crisis then. It's doubled since then. Now half of all college courses are taught by people as contingent labor. One of the problems is if you just give everyone full-time contracts, there are certain, and you make rules for it, there's certain people who have been adjuncts for a long time who are going to be left out. And there's also other issues. So it's a very, very complex issue, but I don't think there's any more pressing issue in higher education. And it has to be addressed, and it has to be addressed by whatever the institution is in the terms that are most equitable at that institution. But I think it's an absolutely major, major problem. When I went to school, I went to a tiny little school that didn't have a lot of money, and many of my professors were adjuncts in a time when adjunct profession was something that, a lot of I taught Maria Baraka, Gwendolyn Brooks. These were poets and artists who were desperate to have adjunct salary. And it meant something, and relative to that income, the salaries now are way less than minimum wage would be in terms of the time spent. It's a tragedy. The way we've sold out the younger generation, we've also sold out adjunct professors. I couldn't be more passionate about that. But the answers have to be locally decided with the community of adjuncts as part of the decision process. Absolutely activist and part of the decision process. Yes?
Thank you. How do you view, or what do you see is the role of interdisciplinary research writing and teaching and/or fully fledged interdisciplinary degree programs in transforming the future of higher education?
So, first of all, I think we actually are beyond what the education I would want is beyond interdisciplinarity. It's actually looking at the ways all of these things that we now kind of call disciplines, but that in fact have lots of permutations and rules around the edges. A friend of mine on Saturday called it border work. She doesn't want to use the term interdisciplinary anymore, but border work. The different places, and it's different in every situation, but if you have a problem, the different ways you take from different parts of different things that we now call disciplines in order to answer that. And there's not any one way to do it. So for me, the key part of interdisciplinarity is there's no one interdisciplinarity. There's ways that you snatch and capture different pockets of expertise and knowledge in order to address a complex problem. But that would be very different depending on what the problem is that you were addressing. So I think it's absolutely central. I was vice provost, the country's first vice provost for interdisciplinary studies for 8 years. And my job was to make programs across the silos that financially, bureaucratically, institutionally could not be made. It was great. The president of my university said my job was to break things and make things. And there was a little breaking, little making, a few tears. But it was never, there's not one solution unless you start with a problem and then see who is coming together to answer that problem, to be part of that problem. So it would be a much more fluid university. That if in my fantasy university, there probably wouldn't be departments. There would be thinking groups, research groups, where people were learning from the best researchers who could work in that field, how they addressed the problem and how they reached out to other people and other research with different kinds of expertise in order to address a problem. Thank you. And many of the programs I profile in the book are that model. Problem-based model, snatching expertise, and maybe the next year switching the problem a little bit. And that requires other kinds of expertise. And so it's a constant remixing. Most of us don't feel like, most of us are very staunch about our departments and our disciplines, except we hate them. Interestingly, the same people that create all the credentialing system, Charles Elliott, who creates the credentialing system, also created the American Bar Association, the American Psychological Association, the Modern Language Association, the American Anthropological Association at the same time. So it's not just you need credentials, you have to credential the credentialers, right?
Hello?
Oh, I forgot about that. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Thank you very much.
Okay, here's a question. How can we make impactful teaching?
Thank you.
Can you hear anything?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Can impactful teaching be rewarded in higher education? Or how can that be done?
So I'm sitting next to one of the world's experts on testing here, and probably one of the people who hates standardized testing, high-stakes standardized testing as much as I do. So I'm gonna flip backwards first of all, and as long as the ranking system of higher education is based on test scores, K through 12 can barely change. So it's not just our creativity in higher education, but we're inheriting students who have been taught to answer to the test. The way that I think we need impactful creative teaching is not to think to the test and to actually do everything we can to reward students for whom the one best answer from 5 answers is not the right answer.
I was thinking, how do we reward the professors?
How do we reward the professors who don't?
The professors are not rewarded for impactful teaching.
Oh, I see.
That's what
I see.
meant.
I missed that. I misheard you entirely. Clearly, we have to change the reward system, right? We have to change the reward system so that teaching and powerful pedagogical teaching is rewarded. It sure can't be student evaluation. Student evaluations are such a faulty. We do every kind of recommendation system in the world for everything. We do terrible recommendation systems for teaching, right? Student evaluations are racially and gender prejudiced. We need to develop far better systems for evaluating good teaching, and excellent teaching has to be as important as research and as important. I think we have to get rid of service as a term. we need to change it to call that third category institution building or institutional change. And all three have to be equally important and equally rewarded within our reward systems.
I just want to comment that K-12 is way ahead of higher ed in this because they've accepted that their mission, they have to teach all the kids. Yes. And teaching is the thing that they're doing. And yet they tried to create performance-based funding and value-added modeling, which the American Statistical Association said was not going to work. Because tying a particular kid's test scores to the performance of that teacher just is a totally problem of sample size and variation, all these things. But now people are starting, schools at a school-wide basis are starting to look at things like the creation of culture, which you can find from multiple data points surrounding this school and the student and the teacher, some of which include attendance and behavior and things that are mundane that schools collect every day. So looking at multiple data points as a way of understanding what teachers do. But first, higher ed has to accept that this is their job.
One of the examples I give in the book is Hampshire College, which very bravely got rid of its data on test scores. Right, said we want a different kind of student. We want a more imaginative student. Our professors want a more imaginative student. So we don't, not only won't we count test scores, we're gonna not keep any of the data. That means they can't be in the rankings anymore, right? So the system of teachers being not rewarded for teaching is also a whole complex ranking system that has to change. I was very happy to see just 3 days ago, the new metrics for graduation rates that for the first time say, oh, a non-residential student working a full-time job shouldn't graduate. How could they graduate in 4 years? Why are we saying community colleges are doing a bad job? Why aren't we thinking about the life circumstances? And that's sort of what K through 12 is looking at too. Why aren't we looking at the life circumstances, the work lives of our students before we talk about, and this is how it's been used. Higher education is failing, community colleges are failing, go to for-profit colleges where we'll rip you off, right? And so so some things are changing. Some things there is some progress being made. Yes.
Hi. I work at a college where they've just reorganized us from fairly interdisciplinary to departments and divisions. And so we all want to know, in a situation like that, how do you keep yourself open to interdisciplinarity? And we want to know on an individual and a systemic basis.
And what college is that?
I'm at SUNY Empire State College.
And it used to be entirely interdisciplinary?
We had different centers throughout the state, and each center had faculty working on various things that had meetings together, and now we are divided into more traditional divisions and departments statewide, so most of our meetings are on Skype now.
So I spent enough time as an administrator to feel like sometimes you have to find creativity within institutional structures. If you're stuck with an institutional structure, there's still so many exciting things you can do. Research centers, research clusters, reinvent interdisciplinarity as peripheral research things now that university has gone to that. Interdisciplinary can become as ossified as disciplinarity too, right? In other words, the point is to constantly replenish, to constantly look at the way the knowledge your students are getting relates to the knowledge they need in the world. And I don't mean skills training. I mean, Thucydides can be part of that knowledge they lead in I don't know why I'm on Thucydides. Anyway, can be part of that knowledge in the world. But there's many things you can do for your own creativity and for your students' creativity within that structure. And that's what the majority of the world does. And they do have very, very exciting things going on. And you maybe you've got a leg up because you've already got that heritage and those connections and those worlds.
I'm already working on a digital humanities project with information systems, but if I'd come into the place with this setup, I might not have met her. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, one of the things we found with interdisciplinarity is often people, when you come up for tenure, say, oh, their work is great in our discipline, but if people in a department will say that, but then they project and say, but that other discipline wouldn't approve of their work. And often the other discipline, in fact, does approve of the work. And so you're making this kind of shadow scapegoat. So I also think that people need multiple ways of being reviewed across all the different disciplines that they inhabit. And there are lots of models of that at different universities.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck. Yes.
So I have a question, but then Cathy, your comment about community college, I kind of feel a need to comment on as well. So my question is, you kind of suggest that educators need to be activists and push for social change in our communities, and I couldn't agree more. My question is, how do we become activists within our own universities when that activism is not always welcome, and that change is so difficult unless you really push? And my second piece is, in listening to you about community colleges, and how do you find that middle ground that doesn't buy into the whole question of community colleges being a failure, but at the same time challenges some of the myths about who are our students at community college? And of course, you cite in your book an example here at CUNY that I've been part of. So the idea that, you know, students can't go full-time or they can't graduate in 3 years, we've proven that that's not the case. And that, in fact, if you pay attention to detail and you do all the things that you need to do, and that 90% of our students start full-time and then don't complete full-time because of all kinds of circumstances. So I kind of want you to clarify that last statement.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So this is another one of the heroes in my book, John Mogilescu. I don't know if you all know him, but he's not just a hero in my book, but a hero in the books of many, many educators in the nation. One of the founders of the ASAP program, which is a program that has certain basic principles, some of which are educational, some of which are cognizant of the life of students, but has changed graduation rates at community colleges, some of them from 8 and 10% to 60%. I mean, astonishing. There's nothing equivalent. Like, I don't think there are any other programs like this in the country, and many people are learning from this. So it's one of the great, my book is both pessimistic, and I try to come up with models of things that are working, because I think the way we become, these two questions go together. The way we become activists in our own universities is we find successful models of change and use those to build on them. Sometimes we get in trouble for it, and I think all of us as human beings, not just as educators, but as human beings, have to decide when it's worth, to quote Donna Haraway, it's worth it to stay with the trouble. And when we have to say, I just can't fight every battle, right? But we have to make that decision and be cognizant that we're making that decision. Sometimes it's a lot of trouble, but you're killing your soul if you think you're just doing what your institution wants. And surprisingly, maybe I've just been lucky, because I was the kid who was kicked out of school 4 times. I'm not a traditional academic by any means whatsoever. But I've always found if you come up with something constructive and find a few other people to go in with you and present a solution to somebody, they often don't have ideas, and they actually are often willing to try something. I know what John did with the ASAP program was not only tried things, but would study them across with a control group. And if they worked, put more resources in them and do something even more on that. So the things are pretty simple, like full-time students, excellent advising, short-term loans, because so many students, if their Pell Grant doesn't come in the mail, they have to drop out. So a short-term bridge loan. I'm forgetting some of the other key features, but they're features that are remembering that the people in our classrooms who are students have complicated lives, and how can we support them in lives? Offering courses at weird times for educators, but survival times if you've got young kids or if you're working full-time, right? Those are things that are pretty, that's kind of common sense. That's not so hard to do that. And it's life-changing if you're working a 9-to-5 job and there are no classes taught on Saturdays or Sundays. Cohort, that's probably the single most important thing that we've found, and that's true whether it's study groups at Harvard or the ASAP program. If you take certain courses as a cohort or certain programs as a cohort, the motive, and it's same with those gym memberships, right? If you're gonna stay in a gym, join with a friend, right? Join with 2 friends, and make sure you've got grumpy friends who help police you and keep you going to the gym, right? Cohort models work. We know they work. In fact, in the Harvard study of what made success, study groups, so a cohort, was the single biggest factor that made a difference. I don't think community colleges or any college should be let off the hook for those kinds of responsibilities. I do think, though, setting Harvard up as a standard Where Harvard, if it were a GDP, if its endowment were a GDP, it would be the 18th biggest nation on the planet, the 18th most prosperous nation on the planet. Comparing that to Gutman or a community college here is just insane, right? And Harvard has, I hate it when people say, it's one of my pet peeves, only 50% of students graduate in 4 years. Actually, at Harvard, like 98% graduate in 4 years, right? They come in as the best students ever. They don't have jobs. They live in a dorm, and they have advisors. And again, I know this from having taught at a private school, who are on a faculty member's tails every minute to make sure their students are graduating, right? That's what you do when you have those kind of resources. To judge every school by that standard misses also the incredible things: courage, determination, drive, optimism, faith in the power of education that students who don't necessarily come from the richest families in the world have to have in order to succeed. You know, there's a chapter in the book called College for Everyone that's about all the things every school can, must, and should learn from community colleges. What Gail Mello, the president of LaGuardia Community College, talks about when she says Harvard has it easy. They only have to deal with find the top 4%. At LaGuardia College, we have to teach the top 100%. That means saying, who are we missing? People coming out of prison. The mother who dropped out of school and has a GED and now has 4 kids. Someone who's working a full-time and a part-time job. Who are we missing? How do we take those people and make sure that their lives are changed by our education? That's what every college should be using. That should be the bottom line moral for all of the new education. How are we taking students who come in, whoever they are, and ensuring, creating a system, a structure that allows every student to leave more able to fulfill their dreams and to help this society that they've inherited? John, thank you for all you do. As I said, you're one of the heroes in the book, and thank you.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. Who has a 1-minute question? Is it you? You've been waiting a long time.
So actually, it's a follow-up question on this one. I was thinking about the idea of being activist.
Mike?
Doesn't work? Yeah. So I was thinking about the idea of being immigrant and being activist. And my question would be if this new multicultural academia is undermining activism and social change in any way.
If multicultural academia is undermining activism?
Meaning that, for example, in my case, I've lost roots, I've lost juridical security being here, so I feel that being activist is more difficult here in the United States than in Spain, in my case. So do you think that that could change activism?
The comment I made earlier, where every human being has to decide how much they want to take on, how courageous they want to be. I think that's a very powerful individual choice. We all saw that the woman who flipped a bird at the president the other day just got fired from her job for doing that. We live in a world where there are costs, and I fear there are going to be higher and higher costs to activism. What each of us what's incumbent on all of us is to think about whether it's worth the cost of our souls to not be activists, or whether we still have to make activism part of our lives, even being fully responsible and cognizant of the possibilities of a grave price to pay, as has certainly happened with the Black Lives Matter activists in the past. And many, many, many histories for hundreds of thousands of years of activism has never been an easy thing, and certainly not for people of color, right? It's never been an easy thing.
I'd just like to ask you real fast. Do you know what the...
We're at time, but that doesn't mean that the conversation has to end here. There is going to be a book signing and reception afterwards. So hi, everybody. I'm Casey Holman. I'm the Director of Programs and Administration for the CUNY Humanities Alliance, which Provost Connolly mentioned earlier is a new partnership between the Graduate Center and LaGuardia Community College to train graduate students to teach student-centered teaching methods in humanities at LaGuardia Community College, and also fosters engagement in the humanities among the LaGuardia Community College students. So before I let everybody go, I want to thank you both for that insightful and amazing conversation. You know, I've worked with Cathy for many years now, and I'm always surprised every time she speaks. I come away more well-informed and inspired at the same time. So I have to thank GC Public Programs, Karen Sander and Jimmy Koch for putting their team for putting this together, along with the Futures Initiative, Katina Rogers and Lauren Melendez, and their team of remarkable graduate fellows who do amazing work. And I also want to invite you to both a book signing and a reception, which is happening in the Amy and Tony James Gallery, which is out the door and around the corner, still attached to the Graduate Center lobby. So the reception is being hosted by the Center for the Humanities and the CUNY Humanities Alliance, both of which would not be doing their work without the support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. So they are the last group to honor and thank. So please join us and keep the conversation rolling. Thank you.